In Charlie's early years, herself in prison. Hard to raise a kid when you're in prison. So he was left with other people. And then he very soon found a life in prison himself.
Burglary, assault, grand theft auto. By his mid-30s, Manson's rap sheet matched that of a career criminal. Virtually raised by the U.S. prison system, he had all the skills a cult leader needs.
Here's a man whose life was one of being in and out of prison. He was very streetwise from that standpoint. I think he learned how to manipulate people in prison because that's part of the prison culture.
When Charlie Manson was in prison, even a psychiatrist, a child psychiatrist that had seen him there, said that he was quite the little politician and that he had learned to maneuver other people. He learned to deal with people, get into people's skins.
After decades of honing his skills on his fellow inmates, Manson would put them to use on a new group. Lost and vulnerable young women like Van Houten.
When he stepped back into society, he was able to lure the unsuspecting teenagers, the young girls who were looking for a purpose.
Future cult members are in between high school and college, in between marriages, in between jobs, in a place where you're without moorings for a period of time. And so the in-betweener is very vulnerable to recruitment.
By the time Leslie arrived, there were already lots of girls like her in the group. Susan Sadie Atkins, 20, a runaway who met Manson in San Francisco. Patricia Katie Krenwinkel, 21, who walked away from her home and her job to run away with Manson. Lynette Squeaky Fromm, 20, who found in Manson a way to escape her domineering father. Manson called them his family.
Many of these young girls are runaways, and so he would say, oh, you have serious issues with your father or your mother. Well, you could just guess from the fact that they were runaways that was the problem. But they, in their minds, thought, oh my gosh, here's somebody who understands me.
The cult leaders have early experiences of neglect, of abandonment, of disappointment in parental figures and authorities. So then the dynamic is that they become the parent, the powerful parent, the omnipotent parent for the followers as they find them.
To the outside world, Manson's family was a harmless hippie commune. But Manson himself was no hippie. Underneath the flower child exterior, he was a vicious, vengeful, power-hungry cult leader.
The women were required to serve the men. They were to cook the food. They were to be the providers in many instances. If the young women had children, Charlie made it a point to try to separate the women from their children. This was, I think, part of his grand scheme to control and manipulate.
To complete this control, Manson gave his girls LSD, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. Soon he held power over their minds and bodies, commanding them to have sex with men he wanted to recruit. Like many cult leaders, Manson was able to sexually exploit his members because of the strength of his indoctrination. He had convinced the girls he was Christ incarnate.
What you have in gurus like Manson is a charismatic person with a certain brilliance. It's a sort of superficial brilliance, but it's part of that charisma, and on the edge of madness.
Using the girls as bait, Manson lured more and more men into the cult. With their addition to his growing family, Manson could finally start enacting his great plan, Helter Skelter. In December 1968, the Beatles released their White Album. From the first time he heard it, Manson believed the Beatles were speaking to him directly, telling him to start a race war that would lead to the destruction of the world. In his damaged mind, it was an opportunity for the ultimate power he had always craved.
And at the end of the Armageddon, he would rise from the bottomless pit in the desert, along with his band of trusted followers, and he would end up ruling the country, and they would look for a leader, and he would emerge as that leader.
In the Songs of the White Album, Manson believed he found a window to biblical prophecy. The message was clear. In the frantic noise of Revolution Number 9, he heard the chaos of the apocalypse. And in Helter Skelter, he heard confirmation of his role as the second Christ.
All of them knew about Helter Skelter because he would talk about it constantly. And that's the other part of sort of the indoctrination. You know, he would constantly repeat over and over again his plans, his philosophy, his theory as to what was going to happen. And if any family member was initially skeptical of this concept of Helter Skelter, if you keep hearing it over again while you're taking drugs and you're involved in this environment, eventually you begin to start believing.
At age 19, Leslie Van Houten believed in Helter Skelter. And in slave-like devotion to Charles Manson, she would take part in one of the most outrageous crimes of the century. As a teenager, Leslie Van Houten was indoctrinated to believe Charles Manson was God. And to help her God take over the world, she would become one of the most famous criminals in history.
How are you today?
Fine, thank you.
For decades, she has been denied parole. And though parole boards and lawyers change over the years, one other face has been here from the beginning. Victims' rights advocate, Deborah Tate.
I have no hate or contempt for these people. However, I am extremely committed to keeping them exactly where they are.
Deborah Tate's sister was the most well-known of Manson's victims. In 1969, Sharon Tate was a 26-year-old film starlet, pregnant and newly married to the director Roman Polanski. But before she could become a Hollywood legend, her life would be taken in senseless violence.
There's no guarantee that...
For the last several years, Deborah Tate has attended the parole hearings of all former members of the Manson family.
...for their actions.
Subsequent parole consideration hearing for Leslie Van Houten.
But Van Houten's case is the most controversial.
Compared to the other Manson family members, she has been convicted of the fewest number of crimes, and if anyone is closest to being paroled, it would be her.
I just have to be here to remind society of exactly what it is we're talking about. And what we're talking about is cold-blooded, senseless murder.
By 1969, Manson was obsessed with Helter Skelter, the song he believed foretold the end of the world. After a great apocalypse, Manson believed God would give him control of the earth and power over all its inhabitants. But the world had yet to see what grisly crimes would be enacted in the name of this bizarre scheme. August 9th, 10 p.m. Charles Manson drops off 4 of his cult members, Sadie, Katie, Linda, and Tex, at a randomly chosen house in a wealthy white neighborhood. Driven by their belief in Manson, the 4 cultists enact the plan devised to start Helter Skelter. One by one, they brutally beat, stab, strangle, and shoot their 5 victims, including actress Sharon Tate, who was stabbed 16 times in the back and chest. Her blood is used to write cryptic messages on the walls.
When the murders were first reported, it sent a wave of fear throughout Los Angeles. It was very confusing. People didn't know what to think. People were very afraid because you have these random killers.
The murders sent a wave of fear throughout the city. But they failed to start the apocalypse. Manson's vicious plot called for more murders, and he knew that his girls would be all too willing.
The girls in the family viewed Charlie in a number of ways. As a father figure, as a lover, as Jesus Christ, as many of them thought he was. Basically as this presence that they loved and they were willing to do anything for.
The next night, Manson drove to another randomly chosen house in a wealthy white